I think a book which is a good reflection of what Anne-Caroline work has been up to now. So Anne-Caroline is a conservation biologist trained in ecology, and after having been involved in several research projects on invasive species and on, let's say, common species, she decided to have a focus on the relationships between people and nature, and particularly through psychology. And the distinctive mark of her work is really this effort to join and to bridge conservation science and psychology. So Anne-Caroline worked on a very diverse array of subjects, going through zoos, agriculture, invasive species, turtles, pigeons, gardens, and well, don't think about this diversity as something scattered. There is a strong unity between all these subjects, and this unity is given by the aim of understanding what is the real essence of the relation between people and nature, essence and diversity of this type of relation. So this book, I think, is a sort of a summary of what we can say about the relationship between nature and people through the lens of psychology and other lenses, perhaps. So I won't say much more, and Anne-Caroline, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Pascal. Hi, everyone here and online. And I'm very happy to be here to present my actual reflection and thinking about the link and the relation we have between humans and biodiversity or nature. And I'm French, and I'm a Western people, and I'm studying Western cultures. But so all like what I will say now is just devoted to Western cultures. But I try now to look at some other cultures to enrich the Western cultures and the Western relation we have to nature. Okay, so I'll try now to. Yes, it's okay. So I will. So as Pascal said, I'm a conservation biologist, and I'm working together with social sciences and conservation psychology. So we could talk about that later on. But now, and I've been working for 10 years on urban pigeons, but I will not speak about that now. So I just would like to start my presentation by a fictional dialogue between Ursula Le Guin in French, or Le Guin, I don't know if you know this author of science fiction. And she wrote a paper in 1975, which is named What Are Americans Afraid from Dragons? And in this paper, there's a fictional dialogue between honest, industrious American citizens and the authors, Ursula Le Guin. And the man, a bit annoyed, asked, dragon, hobbits, all these little green names and humans, what's the point? But it serves to please you and to make you happy. But I don't have time to waste, the man retorts quickly, curtly, and then he just shall appeal for his ulcers and go off to play golf. And the author said in this text, she said, I could have also answered this. Imaginative literature also serves to deepen your understanding of the world you live in, and of other humans, and of your feelings, and of your destiny. And by imagination, Ursula Le Guin meant a free play of the mind, both intellectual and sensory. Play, that is to say, recreation. She said recreation, a combination of known elements to create something new. And free, because this activity is done in the absence of any goal or profit, in a completely spontaneous way. But this does not mean that the free play of the mind has no purpose and no intention, and one can be free while remaining very disciplined, because for these authors, a disciplined imagination constitutes an essential method or techniques, as well as in science or as in arts. So imagination can be defined as here the fruit of the, well, imaginary can be defined as a fruit of the imagination of an individual, a group, or even a society. That's imagination that produce images, representation, narratives, or myth. So this is a representation of the world that give it a meaning. And this social imaginary, they are related by oral traditions, works of arts in our everyday lives, by advertisements, for example, and they motive us for current actions. So defining current imaginaries and working on new imaginaries in relation to nature seemed to me interesting because because they could help us invent a new transformative path to sustainable futures and sustainability. And in the book, and this book, yeah, this book is in French, but sometimes it could be in English, I don't know. But in this book, I just I explored several themes that, from my point of view, are fundamental to take into account. Well, all these things to put nature back into our common imaginaries. Okay, so what is the nature I'm talking about? Nature I'm talking about is some kind of biodiversity, for sure, because I'm a conservation biologist. So it's a diversity of living beings, so that are always interacting with each other. These assemblages are dynamic and unpredictable, both in space and time. They do not need humans to exist. They are not our enemies, nor our friends. But the nature doesn't need humans to exist, but the humans are dependent on nature. As I mean this with this definition. So how nature is positioned in our dominant imaginaries. So to answer this question, I first looked at its place in the cultural imaginaries proposed by the 30 biggest science fiction blockbusters that are all American. I look at this summer. So this the nature presented in these blockbusters, it's very rare and very controlled, mostly vegetal nature, plants, and it's mostly present for utilitarian purpose, essentially for food. So for example, here you have an example of the fields in Interstellar, but there are some other examples. So there are also nature that is less controlled by humans, but is, for example, in the Hunger Games, forest. And in this case, the nature is mostly dangerous for humans that just go there. So the forest in Hunger Games, and you may also know the forest in the Avatar, in the Navy forest. And there are some wild and bucolic nature presented in some blockbusters, but mostly in happy scenes or memory of romance, like a symbol, like of heavy Edenic nature. For example, here you have Star Wars 2, where Padme and Anakin are in love together. So, however, for ecologists like myself and naturalists, they do not have the same image of nature. So here we are all from the biodiversity group, so we know probably most of us the natural history of the tits, great tits and blue tits, because great tits and blue tits, there are two very common bird species in our forest here in Great Britain and France and Europe, and they feed on various insects and seeds and are generalists. But during the time of reproduction, the parents feed their young mainly with caterpillars, which they collect on the leaves on the trees on which the caterpillars feed. So during the last 15 days of the chick rearing period before the fletching, the demand of caterpillars is very high. So when the growth rhythm of the caterpillars, of the trees and the caterpillars and the birds are just well adjusted, then the caterpillars are so numerous that each couple of tits can raise each spring approximately 10 young simultaneously. So with global warming, trees are budding earlier, caterpillars are born earlier, and tits lay eggs earlier. But the timing of the three seasonal rhythms is not necessarily the same. And when caterpillars grow too early or too late, relatively to the when young tits need them, then the young tits do not have food enough to survive and to grow, and then young tits don't survive, and the population of the tits are endangered by the asynchrony of the rhythm, biological rhythm of the three types of species. So this is very common, but maybe here in this room, you all know this story, but in the normally, this story is not well known because, but even if this story it's happening every year, every spring in every forest in Europe. So the question, why is it so? So for me, the first answer comes from what the American lepidopterist Robert Pyle called the extinction of experience in the 1980s. So he published a text in 1980s and 1993 where he details his hypothesis. He said, "I believe that one of the greatest causes of the ecological crisis is the state of personal alienation from nature in which many people live. We lack a widespread sense of intimacy with the living world. Natural history has never been more popular in some ways, yet few people organize their lives around nature or even allow it to affect them profoundly. Our depth of contact is too often wanting." And so he called that the extinction of experience. And he said that it's not just about losing the personal benefits of the natural high. It also implies a cycle of disaffection that can have disastrous consequences. As citizens grow more removed from personal contact with nature, awareness and appreciation retreat. This breeds apathy toward environmental concerns and inevitably further degradation of the common habitat. So indeed, many studies in development psychology suggest that each person builds himself throughout his childhood by integrating all his or her experience into a coherent set of what the social psychologist Festinger called cognition. So that is knowledge, beliefs, actions, emotions, etc. Everything that makes us who we are. And this coherent set of cognition stabilizes in early adulthood and serves as a reference for the adults we are to evaluate what happens to us later in our lives. So continuing Pyle's reflection, the hypothesis of the extinction of the experience of nature postulates that the changes in the lifestyles of modern societies, increasing urbanization, disappearance of wasteland, for example, but the decrease of the attractiveness of these spaces. So all these modern lives can have a consequence to diminish the place of nature and of the experience of nature in the reference base of successive generations of adults. So in the 2000s, the American psychologist Peter Kahn Jr., who studied the links between nature and mental health, added an element to this hypothesis, which he termed the environmental generational amnesia. He said, "I think we all take the natural environment we encounter during childhood as the norm against which we measure environmental degradation later in our lives. With each entering generation, the amount of environmental degradation increases, but each generation in its youth takes the degraded condition as the non-degraded condition, so that is as a normal experience. I have called this phenomenon the environmental generational amnesia." So yeah, actually, these two assumptions put together, it's let us think that it's like a spiral that we experience less and less nature in our childhood, and then we don't integrate nature in our mental reference, and then we don't find important to take care of nature, and so on and so on. So okay, so what you will see, maybe it's okay, it's like that, maybe, and we are not sure it's like that, but even if it's like that, it's maybe not, it's it may be not very a big problem to be far from the living nature. And but I would answer that it is a problem because actually we need living nature in the good conditions to keep a good quality of life as humans. So it's not me, it's not I'm not the only one to say that, of course. And I say that because thanks to the IPBS. So I don't know if you know the IPBS, the International Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, it's the IPCC for biodiversity. And in 2019, the IPBS made and published a general, I don't remember the name, but actually a general report of the state of the biodiversity in the Earth, together with a summary for policymakers, and with 4 messages. And the message A was the biodiversity is still decreasing. The message B here is that the direct and indirect drivers of change have accelerated during the past 50 years. So here you can see the direct drivers and the indirect drivers. And the message C is that, I quote, goals for conserving and sustainably using nature. Oops, there's someone to admit. Yeah. And achieving sustainability cannot be met by current trajectories, and goals for 2030 and beyond may only be achieved through transformative changes across economic, social, political, and technological factors. And transformative changes are defined as a fundamental system-wide reorganization across technological, economic, and social factors, including paradigms and goals and values. And the message D said that nature can be conserved, restored, and used sustainably, while simultaneously meeting other global societal goals through urgent and concert efforts fostering transformative changes. And then they give some examples that see that it is possible. It will be difficult, but it is possible. So one way to transform, to encourage transformative change would be to recover the relationships we have with this living nature and to reintegrate them into our social imaginaries. Actually, it's my proposition. Well, my proposition. I'm working on that. So here, the social imaginaries is a set of shared meanings and representation of the world that is used by a given society or social group as a self-identification. So as I said before, the social imaginary can be made of myths, collective memories, affect, utopias. Okay, and it's completely linked with the individual experience, individual imaginaries and souvenirs and sharing of this experience. So I propose that social imaginaries are a force toward transformative changes because they can allow paradigm shift. And here I just put an image coming from the work of Daniela Meadows on transformative levels towards sustainability. And here she proposed that paradigm shift is a higher lever for transformability, to transformation to sustainability. Okay. So what can we do? So my first proposition is to make experience of nature possible again. So an experience of nature has been, together with some colleagues from conservation psychology, for example, Susan Clayton, who is a conservation psychologist in the US, we propose a definition of the experience of nature, which is around an encounter or different encounters of meeting from human to nature with different dimensions. So these dimensions can be cognitive, emotional, affective, embedded, social, etc., etc. And these encounters and meetings are lived and experienced differently for the different individuals based on individual histories and individual attitudes and values and previous experience and so on. But also so the dimension, the experience is lived differently regarding nature, encountered, of course, but also social identity and social groups the individuals belong to. And all these 3 dimensions, nature, individual, and social, they're also very important as potential consequences of this meeting for individuals, nature, and and the social groups, so that is the outcomes of the meetings, and all this process, meetings, precursors, meetings, and outcomes make experience of nature. So encouraging a renewed experience of nature could not just be let's do it and please do it, but by encouraging this experience of nature, we have also to address explicitly the issues of social inequity and the unequal access to nature. So here I just read the paper from Alessandro Rigolon that made a review of 47 studies based on the access to urban parks in very big cities throughout the world. Well, not in all cities, not in all countries, because he was interested in the social inequity. So in some countries, you cannot have these statistics. For example, in France, it's forbidden. So you cannot have this kind of studies. But in the US, UK, and Australia, you can. And this review showed that urban parks exist and do exist in all neighborhoods in big cities, but minorities, so he said minorities are people with low income and ethnic minority, they have generally less access to less parks, smaller parks, and less well-maintained parks than rich and white people. So this review just showed that there is still an unequal access to urban parks according to social groups. And this unequal access is not always visible in urban maps because if the urban parks are really presented, located everywhere in the cities. So I read another study published in 2012 by Jason Byrne, and he has explored why the Latino community that lived not far from a natural park near Los Angeles in the US frequent this space proportionally less than the white community. So he made a focus group and multi-interview methods, and he refuted the hypothesis that this was due to social cultural differences, such as a lesser appreciation for nature among Latinos. And instead, he suggests that Latino groups come to this space less because they feel uninvited or even excluded excluded. They refer to it as a white-only park. And they fear gangs and violence, and they cannot find information in Spanish, for example. So these two studies, they confirm that the use of nature is not only a question of personal affinities, but also the conditions collectively implemented to access to it. And these conditions are, for the most part, a matter of political will. So what can be done now? So first, we should really set the concrete conditions to allow everyone to enter into nature experience, if they want, for sure. But in a more profound way, we could lay the foundation for change of a paradigm which still is too systematically opposes social questions and question of nature. So my second idea is to reinvent new ways of learning nature. Because actually we are constantly evolving our knowledge of the world around us by integrating our experiences, our own theorization, and the exchanges we have with each other. So I read very carefully and with big interest the works published by Douglas Medin and Megan Bong and their research team, because they worked with Euro-American children and children from the Native American community named the Memomine in the North America in the US, in the state of Wisconsin. And they showed that these 5 to 7 years old children, they all had the same level of knowledge about plants and animals. But the Memoni children, the Native American, were more able to talk about the relationships between living and non-living entities like clouds, water, but also season, wind, sun, etc., than the European American. And the same research team, they analyzed dozens of illustrated children's books that depict nature scenes, both created by Native America and Euro-American authors. And their study showed that children books drawings from native communities, they offer more varied perspectives of the scenes depicted than your American books. The text associated with the drawings mention more different and specific names of animals and plants, and more often described natural cycles, seasons, and weather. So it is as the people from the Western cultures are more essentialists, in the sense they take elements of nature out of the context and give them general attributes such as name, while people from other cultures would favor contextual description based on the relationship between the living beings with each other. As it would be two ways and incompatible ways to approach nature, so anchored in our culture that it would be different and difficult to enrich and to share. But it's not the case. Actually, last year, a postdoc researcher worked with me. We asked first grader, well, very young children to draw some elements of nature, like vers de terre in French, so earthworms, and oiseaux, birds. And here you have two examples of drawings. And sorry. And then when the postdoc Mara asked the young girls to explain what she draws, Mara asked, so you just make a picture of a earthworm? And the girl said, no, I didn't make a picture of an earthworm. I gave a picture of this earthworm. You see an earthworm that is eating eating a plant, and it's just living in this kind of soil, and so on and so on. So this young girl, she really had an image of a specific earthworm living in a specific environment. So exactly as the Mennonite children in the American. So it was good because he was a French one. Yeah. Okay. And there is another sign that Western children are quite able of learning and integrating an incredible amount of information and knowledge about the biology, that is how an organism works, and ecology, that is how an individual relates to what surrounds him or her, of a large number of interacting species. And you know what? It's with the Pokemon. And actually, the Pokemon, in a small article that it caused a buzz in 2002, Balfour and his colleague just showed that the young children I don't remember, it's 8 years old, something, they all knew the Pokemon stories. And I don't know if you know the Pokemon, but there are a huge number of species of different, and they evolve. They can transform by themselves, and they interact with each other, and it's very rich, a very rich world. But these 8 years old children, they know all the Pokemons, but they don't know the species of ordinary life around their place. So another way, yes, and another way of inventing new ways to learn nature is to rethink the relations between indoor and outdoor nature education. So let us think about the Ecotopia. I don't know if you know the state, the Ecotopia. The Ecotopia is a country that seceded from the United States in 1970, and it's with 3 states from the California and 2 others in the Western coast. And they develop an ecological republic. So the American journalist William Weston was the first person allowed to come and explore this country 20 years after the secession. Of course, it's a novel. Here is an excerpt of one of his articles. This journalist sent to his journal in New York, I think. And the article is named "The Surprises of Ecotopian Education." And this is a part of this article. And he said, even without a specific curriculum, students do learn and to read, write, and do math, but they tend to do their learning in very concrete context. They also acquire a lot of knowledge and skills outside of the traditional curriculum. Any 10 years old, I have observed, can build a shelter, grow vegetables, hunt for food, make simple clothes. He knows hundreds of plants and the habit of as many animals. Okay, this was a fiction. You should read this book if you didn't. What the fictional journalist William Weston described has been partly experimented for some years in the so-called forest schools, especially in Great Britain. And these schools encourage a play-based pedagogy, especially for the youngest. So in an article here published 2 years ago, two researchers interviewed about 30 children from 2 English elementary schools that practice these forest schools. So these children, they spend at least half a day a week in nature and practice free play, interacting with nature. So the children interviewed by these researchers confirmed that these outings allowed them to play, but also to learn to use tools, to do things with their hands and bodies, and to gain confidence, to solve problems, etc. Exactly what the authors, was a journalist, said 30 years ago. And they also talked a lot about the sense of newfound freedom. But in this article, what just shocked me was the difference between the answers from the children, the youngest children, 4 to 5 years old, and the children 8 to 9 years old. Because the youngest children, they didn't dissociated they didn't dissociated what they learn in the forest and in nature and what they learn in the schools. But the 8 years old, they clearly dissociated the time spent in the school in which they learn and the time spent in the forest and nature in which they play. So it was as these 8 years old children had already very well integrated the social norms of our modern societies. We play to have fun in moments of leisure, but at schools, in a serious moments, we learn without playing. So however, play, imagination, and fiction are complementary ways of reconnecting with nature. So the third issues I would like to address here, and the last one, is play, imagination, and creation. Okay, a French woman, Marie-Laure Ryan, in 2007, she described play as an optional activities in another space-time compared to our everyday environments, and which has no lasting consequences for the players. So when you play, when a child plays, he creates an imaginary world, and then he lives in this world. Maybe, for example, no, I don't have, well, we could say about some examples, but just an imaginary world with an enchanted forest, or just a castle with a princess, and then a river, plenty of crocodiles who have to deal with them, so on and so on. And there are no rules in the playing, and except the rules the players gives around, just go on playing. And the only problems with the playing is when there's someone else that's just erupt from the playing, saying, oh, it's time for bath, for example, and then the play stops. When it's different here in English, you have 2 words to play, it's a play and game. So I'm speaking about play here. In French, we have just one word, but in the play game, in the playing, for example, the play, then the imagination just go on and go on and go on. So playing and imagining worlds with no other objectives than to have fun is what most young children still do spontaneously, without feeling that they are wasting their time. So in the world of the French researcher Serge Moscovici, I would say that we have lost as adults these moments of effervescence in our relationship with the world, when we accept, and in this moment we accept our emotions. And there is another useless activities, which is reading, and reading fictional narratives. And what is fiction? Fiction here is something created by the human mind, about everything that may happen. For there is truth in fiction, but it's not about empirical evidence, but on either coherent truth or personal truth. And which is narrative? Narrative is the presence of at least two actions or events in chronological order, which stand in some kinds of relation to one another. So these are definitions came from Ball and co-authors. So Synthesis published studies about the reception of fiction narratives by the readers. These two authors, David Dodell-Feder and Diana Taimir, propose that reading fiction can increase social cognition abilities, that is, processing, interpreting, and responding to information that come to us from other humans. Indeed, fiction encourages us to enter another world, but also into the mind of the characters who live there, all in conditions that are always less risky than in reality. Because indeed, it is often enough to close the book up and to leave the imaginary world, so it's easy. And as fiction can free themselves from the norms, conventions, or stereotypes that govern our real worlds, they can experiment with improbable arrangements and pull the threads, as for example, do in science fiction. So what about creating science fiction artworks? And that's one of the goals we have been taking since 2018 with the science fiction committee or science fiction group in France, in the Sorbonne University and the National Museum of Natural History in Paris. And during each season, a very diverse group of students, volunteers, join a collective of artists to create and describe future worlds after acquiring a common base of scientific knowledge on the season's themes. So we had already three different seasons, one of the biodiversity and nature in the cities, the second one on feeding and food and feeding in the future, and the third one this year on the communication between species. So the futures created, they all incorporate elements of a living nature, but in conditions as diverse as the mind of the students and the artists. So here I will finish with two propositions of the two creation. So the first, it was a novel, a very small novel, coming from a student in math, Roxanne. So if I may make one last recommendation, you should talk to the other residents to reassure them that these green solid bodies living in your body are not dangerous. It would be beneficial to them and they will trust you more than me. It is important that you, that is you and your symbiotes, do not consider each other as a threat. Otherwise, on the stress, that could disrupt your internal cycle, which would mask the well-being they bring to you. So this is one example. In season 2, on food and feeding, Meltem, which is another student, proposed this one. Well, she made these drawings and this picture with this explanation. Today, in 2039, Cinero interference, so this is a cinema projecting the unconscious of individuals, has allowed us to hear conversation between vegetables. So the information may be not accurate, but it suggests that vegetables may have dreams, nightmares, and perhaps even emotions. Resistance fighters from the vegan army have transferred a printout of a tomato's unconsciousness to us here. As you can see, the communicative space is in no way used in the same way as in humans to express anxiety and apprehension. However, it is obvious from the curves and colors of this diagnosis that this tomato is under a lot of pressure. So this could be interesting because, of course, it's a fiction, but we can learn from fiction. So entering into a relationship with living nature, putting this relationship back into our common values and our social imaginaries, this is a proposition I make to implement transformative changes. And without being afraid of fictions, Because, and I give the last word to Ursula Le Guin, phrases like once upon a dragon or in a hole lived a hobbit, which state wonderfully non-factual ideas, may be one of the weirder circuitous ways in which these fantastic human beings can one day reach the truth. I thank you.
Yeah, I mean, as an online audience to speak, the microphone will speak.
Yes.
No.
And there's something on the chat.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Oh, do not post it in the chat. Okay.
Thanks for this very interesting presentation. I want to ask a question related to the first bit on the shifting baseline syndrome. I find it interesting when I read fairy tales to my daughter that you know, we've been somehow very efficient in conserving all the negative impressions of nature, so like wolves, for instance, right? Although we have not, so that's not based on like our own experience, right? But still, we have this, now the wolf is coming back to like Northern Europe, right? And everyone is very scared. So somehow we've managed to preserve that in popular culture, but not all the sort of positive impressions of nature. Why is that, and how can we sort of overcome that in the future?
I don't know, but it's very interesting what you say. I don't know. But maybe I don't know if we keep only the bad things or if we just remember the bad things. But maybe the positive relation they are still here, but we don't remind them very easily. And I didn't say it here, but I'm working with an artistic magician now, and because he made his name is Etienne Saglio, he's French, but he made an artistic show like named Le Bruit des Loups in French. So this is with a forest and a wolf, and it's without well, it could be here. It's international because there is no wording here, and the story is that it's coming from an adult here. The first scene is an adult, a very stressed adult and controlling all nature in his small room. And then for many different reasons, the adults just remember souvenirs when he was a child, and he had a strong souvenir in the forest. And oops, because it's a magic, the adults become child, and then he's in the forest. So there is a forest appearing in the scene, a very real forest, and the forest which is very much, I think, popular in French and even European culture because it's the forest for the fairy tales. This is a forest with a giant, with wolves, with bats, with and so on. And in this forest, it's not all negative. The feeling you have in the audience here when you see the show, they are not negative, they are just contrasted. So you don't know if you have some good souvenirs, bad souvenirs, and you remember many things you could have, and even experience directly, or you experience through fairy tales. And so to answer your question, I think the souvenirs can be mixed, and it's normal because the diversity relationship between nature, between humans and nature, they are diverse and they are complex. And we should not just remember the wolves.
Thank you.
But similarly related to this, we also idealize a much intensified agriculture in children's literature and children's book. And we learn about farms as intensive farms, but in fact, we need to shift that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was super interesting. I'm just wondering, when you work on the science fiction with, is it like in classrooms, in schools?
No, it's not in schools. It's for volunteer students, but it's not credited.
Okay.
So it's extra schools, extra
so
university.
How do you structure it? Is it like you have like modules where you talk to them about the environment and nature, and then they write the science fiction, or like how does it work?
It's still in progress, but this year it was a good year, I think. And we selected 25 students, And we had a cycle of a short seminar, 1 hour seminar with scientists before online in June. On 9, I think we had 9 seminars, different seminars. And then we all left in a residence, artistic residence, for 1 week. And together with the students, the staff, and the artists. And it was in Brittany, in a very, very beautiful place. And then the students, they make a masterclass, half-day masterclass with every artist. So they just discovered different artistic way to create. And they had 2.5 days to create. And they showed their creation with the public, a real public, at the end of the week. And it was very great. And we will keep going with this method.
Teenagers.
No, it's a student. So they are from, it's not, well, it's teenager, they're late teenagers from around 20 years. And we select students, and when we select students, we want them to be, we want the group to be very diverse and diversified. So we select students from the graduates the year 1 for the university, at the high school to year 5 or even more, and from different disciplines. So there are students coming from literature, from math, from design, from architectures, from ecology. Yeah.
We had a seminar recently where starting a GCSE, the GCSE natural history is about to be accepted here.
Okay.
So it'd be interesting to
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
Thank you, very, very interesting. Just to turn back to that point that you made about the darker side of natural world, I think that part of the product of the separation from nature is this over-romanticization of nature, this very positive, benign view of nature. And, many of us have worked in cultures and on rainforest frontier and other places, but people have a very ambiguous view. It's, yes, there are positive aspects, but there are also dangers and threats, snakes, other things. And I think actually the Disney view of nature is also a problem because, and like a couple of things that we're interested in, like rewilding, people have concerns about dead bodies of animals, which are ecologically very positive, but people don't want to see them. For animal welfare, the idea of animals going hungry and things. So I think this immersion in nature also, it's important that people see the negative sides of nature as well as more positive interactions with other creatures there as well. So even, and I think this Disneyfication of nature is problematic as well as a very non-complex benign view of natural world.
I agree with you that it could be problematic, but I don't like using the word problematic because I'm a conservation biologist, but really now I would like to my colleagues from conservation biology integrate as well the other ways of relating to nature, because we are not the only good people that know how we have to interact with nature. And so, of course, the relationships are complex, and this some kind of a biblical hedonic nature is not the real nature or the biodiversity. And but what I wanted to say is that maybe the conservation biologist, we forgot that we have also some emotional, for example, relationship to nature. And when we speak about nature almost only with stats and math and numbers and curves and scientific Latin names. And when we discuss with each other about why we are doing this job, then it's not about some math, just because we love And most of them, most of us, we love nature, and most of them are naturalist people, and they go to forests and they say, wow. And but they never say that because it's not legitimate as a science. And this is the way this is what I discovered when I just discovered the conservation psychology, saying that just emotion, play, and imagination is very important to also to be in contact with the world and to be in contact with other people and to interact. So this is complex, but this is complex for everyone. The one over there and over there, here.
All good?
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for the wonderful talk. I got really curious about that study that was done in the urban parks and noticing how it was basically dominated by the white communities, even though it's an open public space. And two questions arose for me. The first one is a study like that or to that effect been done in an Eastern culture? And the second question stemming from that would be, do you find that this divide obviously is driven by social inequities, but also our Western conceptions of the way we relate to nature, that we're much more individualistic? Do you see this, I guess, really as a cultural issue in the West, or how else would you see it?
I don't know how to answer your question. Actually, I didn't do this study by myself, and so I just read the articles. And because and one reason is because in France we are not allowed to do this kind of stats. So that's we don't ask this question because there is no problem. And no, but I for sure it's a Western. It's due to Western culture. It's typical from Western culture. And which we should not say that it could be the same in other cultures, for sure. But what interested in me in this is that I read the work of the economist Amartya Sen. I don't know if you know him, on capabilities, and he said that define the terms of capabilities, which is a set of possibilities for humans to choose what they want to do and to increase in freedom. And he said that capabilities would be much more important to assess as an indicator of the richness of the social group or a nation than the resource or actual resource. And he proposed that resource could be translated in capabilities with different conversion factors, he named them. And the conversion factors, they are not only individual factors, because of course some conversion factors are individual because it depends on the personal abilities, knowledge, and so on. But there are also conversion factors that are political, economic, and technological, and social. And this was the theory of a theoretical background I read that was very important to me to bring together individual, natural, and social aspects. And this inequity and unequal access to urban paths could be read through the capabilities approach. Yes.
Very good question. First of all, thank you so much for an interesting presentation. So from your profile, I've read that you're an active supporter of public engagement with science. Spreading the word around about what you've done and what should be done outside the classroom. So what would you advise to DPhil students, researchers, academics in terms of this topic and making it more accessible and available to the general public? What kind of events?
I don't know. Actually, I'm very convinced about the importance of diversity. So the diversity of nature, of course, but also diversity of people and humans. And we are all very different in our way of thinking and our way of doing and our way of relating to nature. And I would like to offer students to engage in the way they want to engage, because for sure there will be people that will be interested. And now I don't know how it is in the UK, but in France, for example, for education, we have still only one way to educate children and people, which is a very scientific one. So you give scientific information, you give scientific facts, and then the people, they will understand, and then they will surely change their behavior. It doesn't work, and it doesn't work, but it's sure that it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because all the communication scientists, they know it for years that it doesn't work, because even when you know something, it doesn't mean that you will behave differently, because you behave with the emotion and not with the knowledge. So you have to know, but it's not sufficient. And it doesn't work because we are all different. So for some people, the science fiction will be very good. For some people, it will be bullshit. And for some other people, it was the direct experience. And for some other people, it will be just cognitive and facts and knowledge and cognitive knowledge. And all is very important. But I hope then we'll be able to discuss together and to accept that the other people are different from us, and they can be different, and they have something to say. And the last thing I would say is that nature, as I defined it here, nature for me could be a common for everyone, because we are natural, we're animals, so we are in connection with nature, non-human nature, and even if we don't realize that. So we all have something to say. I'm sure we all have something to say about the relation we have to nature. But some people, they even don't realize they can say something. So maybe nature and relation we have with nature could be a common ground for new human relationship, yeah, and new social relationships. Yeah, could be nice. This is my way. Yeah.
I think we'll ask you a question, but I think we're running out of time. So
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you.